before I'll be a slave. I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free and be no segregation.
When the first Africans arrived in the New World, they arrived as slaves. Most of them came from West Africa, where there was a strong tradition of singing and playing music, so naturally many slaves continued to sing when they were in the New World. Eventually, slaves made the transition from singing in their native language to English, but they managed to preserve their unique African musical characteristics because there was little outside influence from other musical styles due to the strict separation of whites and blacks. It is very easy to see this because of the complicated rhythms, variations in timbre, improvisation, and the patterns of call and response that are seen in both West African music and slave songs during the Antebellum period. In West Africa, Africans would play music for just about any occasion. There was little listening value of the music, and it was a more integral part of the culture and day-to-day life. This practice was carried into the New World and was the basis for the Worksong. The Worksong was probably one of the earliest forms for music among slaves and was used to assist in the ability of the slaves to work. The songs would usually be about how a group of workers felt about their work or their employers. There was usually a leader to motivate the men by singing first and incorporating a call and response pattern. The leader needed to know what song was appropriate for the mood of the workers or the time. Eventually, this evolved into chain gang songs. The sea shanty was also a work song that was primarily used on boats for seafaring. However, the relationship between blacks and the sea shanty is not apparent because there is not much of an association between the black man and sea life. Recreational music was also a big part of the slave culture during the antebellum period. Similar to the African tradition, where songs were sung for almost every occasion, the songs sung by slaves could be about almost anything. These songs reflected a great deal of the culture and environment that they lived in. Many of the songs had hidden messages and double meanings as well. So unless one was a slave or had the experience of a slave, they were not able to comprehend the meanings behind these songs. Some songs were focused on the sexuality between blacks and included metaphors and sexual connotations in the lyrics of these songs. This would protect them from explicitly describing their sexual endeavors, which were in many cases forbidden by the master. These lyrics were complemented with a low, earthy, and dark sound. This is evidence that the style of music was the precursor to the rhythm and blues of the 20th century. Satire was also a common topic in recreational music, and many slaves would use it as a means to make fun of their masters and other white people. With this, slaves could freely express themselves without feeling the repercussions for their statements. This satire was also used against some blacks as well. In addition to the metaphors and double meanings in both recreational and spiritual songs, slaves also used music to send coded messages. Slaves would sing in order to warn other neighboring slaves of danger or to carry messages of freedom or any other important news. This helped to protect those slaves trying to escape to the north using the Underground Railroad. Songs like Wade in the Water provided specific instructions on how a runaway might escape if they are being tracked by bloodhounds. Follow the Drinking Gourd was another popular song among slaves and was sung in reference to the Big Dipper because this was used by slaves to navigate themselves to the north. These songs were never written and were simply passed on by word of mouth, so it is remarkable that they still remain today. It was hard for many slaves to use instruments in their music, aside from their hands and feet. Instruments were hard to come by unless you were in a band or musical group. Slaves would improvise here using anything they could find that would make the appropriate sought-after noise. These devices included frying pans, lard tins, a washboard, harmonica, a kazoo, sticks and bones, clappers, and spoons. The washboard was the most popular scraping instrument and was usually scraped by a stick, wire, or nail. Slaves were also known to use tambourines when they would gather together and sing and dance. The most popular instrument of African American music was the banjo. This was a stringed instrument with the body of a tambourine but the neck of a guitar. No one is quite clear on where it is from, but there is some evidence that it was derived from a similar instrument in Africa. The one instrument that slaves lost when coming to the New World was the drum. It was pretty much taken out of slave life and forbidden by most slave owners because it was thought they would use the drums to communicate with each other. The Negro spiritual comes from the rural areas during slavery. Slaves would stay after the worship services at church for singing and dancing, although many slave owners did not allow slaves to play drums and dance as they did in Africa. They would also have secret camp meetings in order to share each other's joys, pains, hopes, and basically to support each other. It was in this setting that the spiritual was born. At times, slaves would gather listening to itinerant preachers and singing for hours. Some of the precursors to the Negro spiritual are referred to as corn ditties. This term, the spiritual, is a reference to the Holy Spirit. The lyrics of the Negro spirituals were very closely tied to the experiences and feelings of the author of the spiritual. Some would be very lively and were known as jubilees, and others were more for dancing and are termed as shouts. The main ingredient with these spirituals is that they were inspired by the message of Jesus. Many of the topics revolved around hope and salvation, and some parallels were incorporated between black slaves and the Jewish slaves of biblical times. Some notable spirituals were Swing Low, Sweet Chariot and Let My People Go. There are not many known or published authors of Negro spirituals, but the most famous proponents of them would probably be Harry T. Burleigh or the Fisk Jubilee Singers. Burleigh was an African-American classical composer and professional singer, and was the first to arrange black spirituals as art songs. He was best known for his arrangement of Deep River, but arranged many other spirituals and composed many other works. The Fisk Jubilee Singers were also notable black singers of spirituals, but it was through Burleigh's efforts that the Negro spiritual got credit for being an art song. He helped it make a great impact on future styles of music such as jazz, and indirectly had a profound impact on European music through his relationship with a Czech composer, Antonin Dvorak.
Blacks played an integral role in the Civil War. In the Union Army, black servicemen brought to Army life their love of music. Black ex-soldiers, too, have left written records of Army life that included references to group singing. The white officers strolling around might have sat by and watched evening campfires and been amazed by what the black soldiers were doing. To be sure that these scenes are typical of white camps as well, but the religious activities of the blacks were probably unmatched by any other whites. We are done hoeing that cotton. We are done hoeing that corn. We are colored Yankee soldiers, as sure as you are born. When Master hears us shouting, he will think it's Gabriel's horn, as we go marching on. John Brown's Body came to be the unofficial theme song for black soldiers. Early in the war, it was invested with special sentiment for them. Another popular song was called the Negro Battle Hymn. It's also known as They Look Like Men of War. William Barton recorded several war songs in his collection, Hymns of the Slave and the Freeman. When it comes to the Confederate Army, little is known about the activities of blacks in the Confederate Army, except that slaves were put into service quickly as drummers and fifes, but there is little evidence of recorded songs or hymns.
It all started with Harry T. Burleigh's arrangement of Deep River in 1916. During these years of the 1900s to 1940, African-American singers were on the uprising. Prima donnas of the time included singers such as Cicely Jones, also known as Black Patty, Rachel Walker, the Creole Nightingale, Marian Anderson, mostly remembered for the Easter performance she gave at the Lincoln Memorial in 1939, Katarina Jabaro, soprano, first black opera singer ever to sing on an opera stage in America. Male vocalists included Ronald Hayes, first black man to win acclaim in America and Europe as concert artists. Paul Robeson, who starred in All God's Children Got Wings in 1923, and he was also the first African American to present a repertoire devoted entirely to spirituals. Ensembles include the Fifth Jubilee Singers. These were the ones who started the rebirth of the spiritual. They started the rebirth when they went on tour for their school to raise money. The tour included spiritual repertoire, and most of the places that they visited in the United States had never heard the spiritual repertoire that they sung. Since then, we've seen many concert artists of the 1940s to the present in a more modernized light, many of whom have developed international careers. These performers include singers such as Kathleen Battle. She, in 1977, made her Metropolitan Opera debut in Wagner's Tannhäuser. Miss Battle is particularly noted for lyric roles such as Pamina in The Magic Flute. Martina Arroyo is an African-American soprano who has left a legacy of recordings such as Mozart's Don Giovanni, Rossini's Stabat Mater, and Verdi's Masada Requiem. Grace Bunbury, considered one of the leading and sometimes controversial mezzo-sopranos of her time. In 1962, Miss Bunbury performed at the White House at the request of First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy. Leontine Price, a great opera singer of her time, best known for her roles in Trovatore as Lenore and her performance in Dialogues of the Carmelites, which aired on NBC TV. Simon Estes, a great internationally acclaimed bass baritone. He has sung in front of people such as Bill Clinton, Richard Nixon, and Nelson Mandela. In 1985, Estes sang Porgy in the Metropolitan Opera's first production of Gershwin's Porgy and Bess. Robert McFerrin, the first African-American male to sing at the New York Metropolitan Opera. A severe stroke impaired his speech in 1989, but did not take his voice. He continued singing until he recently passed away in November 2006 at age 85 of a heart attack. William Warfield, a concert baritone singer born in West Helena, Arkansas. He was once married to Leontine Price, soon after playing opposite of her in Porgy and Bess. Mr. Warfield passed in August 2002. Other great opera singers who include spirituals into their repertoire include Shirley Verrett, Camilla Williams, Ruby Hines, Angela Simpson, Trent Cook, Darrell Taylor, Roderick Dixon, Marvin Hayes, and Thomas Young, just to name a few.
There's an old man called Mississippi. That's the old man that I want.
There were many articles written about performers of the African descent. Such articles included Let Him Sing Alone in the Record Eagle, a Michigan newspaper. The article argued to let Paul Robeson sing in a concert hall in Chicago, even if it was to an empty house. The article reads, upon the announcement that Paul Robeson has scheduled 3 dates to sing in Chicago in the near future, the veterans of foreign wars sent an immediate protest to the governor of the state of Illinois. We say, let him.
It was very rare to find black composers during the post-war years. They may have developed popularity on the local scene, but on a national level, they were hardly heard of. Events such as the Nashville Exposition in 1897 gave black composers an opportunity to display their talents. In addition, almost 450 compositions by black composers were collected by Charles Anderson and displayed at the Negro Booth in New York City. African American music received huge notoriety for the contribution of James Monroe Trotter. In 1878, he wrote Music and Some Highly Musical People that displayed an array of musical styles. It was the first of its kind in the music world. He noted many black composers and covered groups such as the Georgia Minstrels and popular dance orchestra groups.
Rosenwald Scholarship, which allowed her to study in England, France, Belgium, Holland, the former Soviet Union, and Scandinavia. Helen Walker, who trained with Nadia Boulanger as a Fulbright scholar at the École Normale de Musique in Paris.
Although the antebellum period was over, bands continued to flourish in America. The city of New Orleans possessed the most bands with popular acts such as the St. Bernard and Kelly's Brass Bands. Most of these bands were organized during the 1870s and the 1880s. In addition, brass bands possessed some legendary leaders. Frank Johnson, who lived in Philadelphia, is noted by many as the most famous black band leader of the 19th century. Among Johnson was Theodore Finney, who was a brass band leader in Detroit that started during the 1850s. Pedro Tinsley, who led the colored cornet band in Boston, started his entertainment reign during the 1880s. However, racism and determination was very prevalent in this music genre. Since black brass bands were a rarity in many parts of the United States, many black musicians were trying to pass as white to join the white bands. Notable instrumentalists such as Henderson Smith passed as white and joined the Patrick Gilmore Cornet Band. The Olympian Brass Band was organized in 1883. They were the first black brass band of New Orleans following the structure of French military bands. Their main performance acts were funerals of members of black society members. Besides traditional Dixieland jazz, they were very diverse, playing different styles of music such as blues,